everyone, I am Rebecca from ChemKnits, and today we are going to dye this beautiful warm gray, cool brown merino yak blend with some cool toned colors. Back in November 2021, I did a Leave No Dye Behind live stream, and the chat voted for me to dye this yak blend with some warm toned colors. And I found myself with a really big urge to use cooler toned blues and grays to see how that would look on this type of base. I haven't decided on the technique yet, but this is the That Yak base from Wool to Die For. And it is 70% superwash merino, 20% yak, 10% nylon. And it is that yak content that gives it this deeper color to start with. I love dyeing this base. It takes up color beautifully, but it does look a lot darker when wet, which can make it a little bit more challenging sometimes to know what is going on with the colors. But I'm very excited to go and pull some cool tone colors for this today. Before I go pre-soak the yarn, I want to give a huge shout out and thank you to today's lab partner, Andy R. Andy, thank you so much for being my lab partner today, and I'm really excited to dye this yak blend sock yarn for you. If any of you would like to learn more about how you can become a lab partner for an episode of Dyepot Weekly, go and check out the listing in the ChemKnits Creations Etsy shop. I'll also have it linked down in the video description. I am going to go add some removable nylon zip ties onto the yarn so it won't get tangled, and pre-soak it in some plain tap water for at least 30 minutes. I have added the yarn to my 4-inch deep full-size catering steam pan with 4 tablespoons of white vinegar and enough water so that way it's just lightly covered. I'm planning to apply dried powder and sort of work it in with a spoon while things are hot. And speaking of, I'm going to start heating this up. I did end up pre-soaking the yarn for a couple of days, so a fair bit longer than 30 minutes, but life happens. Now, since we're going to use dry dye powder, I will be putting on my deluxe rubber respirator mask with P100 filters, safety glasses, and gloves while we are dealing with the dry powder. And everything I'm using is dedicated for dyeing yarn and is not used for the preparation of food. I do have a skein of Knit Picks Swish DK, which is just 100% superwash merino, pre-soaking off to the side in some water with vinegar, and I'll use that as a yarn mop to wipe my gloves onto during the process. But I will also use that to show, after we test out the 3 main colors we're going to use, to show what they look like on white yarn versus here on this yak. The 3 colors we are going to use are Dharma's Midnight Blue, Alpine Blue, and Tornado Gray Acid Dye. If you're curious about these swatches I taped to the lid, this is a swatch poster that Dharma sells on their website, and I don't know if there's an updated one with a Tornado Gray swatch yet, which is why it does not have one. Okay, it's warm and I just reduced the heat. And let's start with some Tornado Gray. I'm starting off by just taking some and sort of speckling it across. I don't want to add the dye in large clumps because you don't want it to not be able to dissolve. This is a very cool toned gray color, and so it's not going to be as intense as, say, a black, but it is still cool toned. And the nice thing is that I can see it, because some colors can be hard to tell as they are coming on here. But again, I'm going to get more random with my color placement as time goes on. It's just for starting, I want to be able to compare them. Oh, there's a big dye clump. Don't want that. Now I'm going to take some Midnight Blue, which is a color I haven't used a ton, but is really, really lovely. It is a very pigmented blue. It is almost a hint purplish, like right here. It almost feels purple on the spoon to me, and just a little bit is very, very pigmented. But It is very much like a blue. And I would say the Midnight Blue looks way more pigmented than the Tornado Gray. At least I had a lot more on my gloves. And then finally we have the Alpine Blue, which is a less pigmented color. And I believe it is also a bit purple leaning. Actually, maybe it's a tiny bit more almost yellow leaning, but not quite. It definitely has less red in it than that Midnight Blue. And I think on camera, well, it's a little hard because the darkest part of my stove is down there. This is a deeper blue than that. So it's close, but different. And so one reason for sort of wiggling things through is this is allowing the dye to go through more layers of yarn than otherwise it might. But I mean, that hasn't struck yet, which is okay. We'll see how fast things strike. I'll set a timer for 5 minutes, and I'm okay if we have some things spread and overtake. But I did want to show you what these three colors look like on a white base. So here we have Tornado Gray, which was not very pigmented. There was a lot of the Midnight Blue on my hands, and then this is that Alpine Blue. So there is a big difference between those two colors in the dry powder form, which is a reason why I chose to use the three of them for this project. But the way the colors are going to look here on this white yarn is quite different from how they're going to appear on this oatmeal-y base. But I actually forgot, because I was like, oh, I'm going to set a timer. Oh, it's only been like a minute, and most of that color has absorbed. But I also forgot, I want to finish adding color to the side. And now I'm going to start to go about it a little bit more randomly. I mean, I'm trying to add like bits of it to all of the skeins, but not necessarily across everything, because I want to have these colors be less repeating and a little bit more random. At least that is my goal. But it does help that the yarn is scrunched up in here. Because the yarn is scrunched up in the pan, that does mean that things won't be like perfectly repeating. Okay, that was some Tornado. Now I need to dry my glove. I think I'm going to do the Alpine Blue next because it is less pigmented than the Midnight. But we'll see how this ends up. There we go. It is okay if we end up with some speckling, and it's okay if we end up with some of this original barrel color coming through. That's not where I added it. I think I added it in here. You can see how it's getting harder for me to tell these different tones that we're layering together. Mainly because things are so deep and dark already. Okay, now for our Midnight Blue. Oh goodness, I don't think I finished the thought earlier. The reason why you want your gloves to be dry before you go into the dye container is that you don't want to introduce moisture back into the jars, because that'll make the dyes start to go bad. And so I'm doing my best to apply the dye in places where it doesn't seem like there was much dye before. But again, we will go through multiple rounds of layering color. But I also think I am going to need to start heating up the dye bath for the yarn mop, because some of this color is so pigmented that I think that the yarn mop is going to need to be set a little bit in between batches. This looks so dark, and I think that it is really hard, especially on camera, to see the differences in tone in here, which I promise they are present. But I think on camera right now it just looks like a mass of color. I just popped my yarn mop into a steamer basket to start steam setting that for a little bit, not entirely, but I was starting to have trouble wiping, especially that midnight blue, onto it because it was not sticking to the yarn enough. But oh my gosh, okay, let me see if I can get the camera feel a little bit more like what I see. So I think that this is a more accurate representation of what I personally can see. And I do see some brighter blues and some of those deeper blues and then a lot of gray through here. But it is hard to see exactly what is going on, which, you know, happens and is part of the process. But I think I'm gonna wait 5 minutes and then we will come back and check in. So there was a little bit of color on my spoon when I brought it over. There's some pockets where there's some color left, but most of the color is on the yarn because when I press there is none. So let's go ahead and flip it. Yeah, and you can see some color come up. We will be moving this yarn more times, but the goal each time we move it is to expose. We got reasonable coverage, but the goal is to expose areas without color to the best of our ability. And this is why we will do multiple checks as we dye it. Now, I love this like deep color variation that we have going on here. I will admit it is hard to see on camera, but I'm going to go ahead and speed things up to keep adding on this color. And at the same time, I don't think our yarn mop really got any heat yet because that is still warming up. But the good news is that if I touch it, the dye isn't coming off as much. So we will be wiping my gloves on this throughout the whole process as well. I added on all 3 colors randomly onto our yak blend yarn. And then I waited 5 minutes before flipping to see if there's any spots left that wanted more color. And there were very few bare spots after that flip. So I decided to go with just the Alpine Blue because it's the brightest or the least deep, at least, of all the 3 colors. And I applied that to any patches that seemed to still be bare. And waited 5 minutes and did the same thing on a flip. And I would do it again if I needed to, but there really wasn't that much bare color left. Almost all of the color had covered the yarn, and because we had enough water in here and we're moving things around, we got really, really good coverage. And again, I'm okay if a little bit of our original color peeks through in areas, but I did want to try to leave out glaring color, so that's why I did multiple checks. Towards the end, it wasn't really necessary to wait 5 minutes in between flips, but I did just because I figured it doesn't hurt. Once I was satisfied with the coverage, I added a bit more water and then let everything heat for 30 minutes before letting it cool completely so we could wash the yarn. And as for that yarn mop, I steam set it for 30 minutes before letting it cool to make sure that all of these colors were well set. The 30 minutes are up and I just turned off the heat. I plan to leave the yarn in here for a little while, but I want to see if I wrap this around. I think it's still really hard to see these like subtle differences in the depth of color that we have on here. It is beautiful. It almost looks like I used like black and navy, but part of that is just because we have depth in that original color. If I had used black and navy, I think it would look even deeper. But anyway, I'm gonna let this cool so we can wash it. So here's our yarn mop, and then Andy, here's your yarn. And I'm so excited to see it dry. These different blue and gray tones. It really has almost a navy and black feel right now, but I think that'll brighten up once it is dry. But now let's go ahead and wash it. I am just really, really excited by the depth of color here. It's definitely darker than I had in my head initially. And again, I'm not sure how much it might lighten as it dries, but you can see here, this is more of a bright blue, and we've got some stormy blue. I see a little bit of color in the water. Our dye bath was clear, but also there could have been some dye on these zip ties that hasn't been rinsed off yet. So I'm not going to worry yet. But while we're filling it up again, let's add, I'm near the end of this bottle, some dish soap. Okay. There's a hair of color coming out still. I'm just thinking a minute. That is very cold. I think what I want to do is go ahead and fill this with some water and use a little bit of some new soap. And I'm going to let it soak for a little bit. And the reason why I'm choosing to do that is that it's possible we had something, like there were some clumps in that midnight blue that didn't dissolve. And so I want to, yeah, I'm seeing a bit more color. I want to let this soak in plenty of water with soap for a bit, so that way that gives a chance for things to come out. So I'll come back in a few minutes. Okay, it's been a little bit of just soaking. Good news is that that's not worse. Since I'm only washing in this small volume bucket, I can always swap to something else. But aren't the colors in here lovely? I almost don't see, the gray almost feels very blue. I should dye like a 1% depth of shade of that tornado gray sometime to just see how blue it is. But, oh, we are looking significantly better. Significantly better. Okay, I think that the soak really, really did help. I'm going to fill this up and let it soak again for a little bit since that seemed to help. And then I'll pop back in. I accidentally dumped it out and was not recording. So, I am filling this up again. And, well, not enough water yet. All right, let's see. I have a feeling that we are looking really, really good, and I'm not seeing any more bleeding. Thank goodness. So now I just need to go put this through my spin dryer and hang it up to dry. Oh my goodness, Andy. This is spectacular. Overall, it is a lot deeper and a little bit more saturated than I think maybe I had in my mind, but it is moody and cool toned and I love it. I love it. It almost looks like I used a lot of extraordinarily deep, deep blues, like navy and maybe an indigo. I'm going to pop up on screen specifically the three colors that I used. I know I used Tornado Gray, which because of it being layered, and I can see it sort of in these regions, because it was layered with these blues, it almost has this navy quality, even if it is warmer in tone on the yarn, because the yarn is predominantly blue. But there is no question that the tone of the two different blues we used is different. And you can see it and feel it, and that makes me so happy. Here's a close-up where you can see those different blues. It's not just a depth of shade difference. One is definitely more purple than the other. It's so subtle, but yet in areas the warmth of the base of some of that cool-toned brown, warm-toned gray is in there, and this goes with these cool tones so, so well. And I am so unbelievably happy with how this turned out. Now, in contrast to our yak base, we have our yarn mop. that has all three colors on it individually with the white there. And when I zoom in, you can see the gray and bits of the two different blues and how in powder form they are all very, very distinct. But then they layer so spectacularly onto the yak. Andy R., thank you so much for being my lab partner for this episode of Dyepot Weekly. I adore the way that this yarn turned out, and I really, really hope that you do as well. I love the That Yak base, and I have a lot of it in mini skeins right now, but I definitely need to order more full skeins because it is just so soft and so much fun to play with. The uniqueness of the starting color just adds this insta depth to whatever you create. Whether you are doing something that is probably going to be fairly saturated, or if you're doing something using brighter tones like neons. It looks great with neons over it. So I am excited to play more, and well, probably at the top of my list is something like this, but in a purple leaning way. Oh man. I mean, I love deep saturated colors like this, and I think that if I was just dyeing for collections to release versus videos, I would probably do like a whole line of, you know, the deep blue, purple, green. Like that's something that is so in my wheelhouse. But anyway, those are the kinds of colors that I like desperately want. But again, Andy, thank you so much for being my lab partner. If any of you would like to learn more about being a lab partner or how to get some yarn that is featured in my videos, go and check out the ChemKnits Creations Etsy shop. There's tons of yarn in there, and yeah, check out the listings for more details. I am Rebecca from ChemKnits, and please make sure that you're subscribed and turn on notifications so you never miss a new video. I post at least 2 new videos a week, and we have special series and live streams, and you don't want to miss any of it because it's all so much fun, and I love sharing my journey of exploring color and yarn, and I'm so excited and have so many ideas of what to share next. Thank you so much for watching.